amazing, amazing. Wow, you even have my podium up here. So good. I ran out of regular printer paper this morning, so I printed this on name tag paper, the Avery one. So hopefully I won't get my finger stuck as I'm talking on one of the pieces, but it's so good to be with all of you this morning. I am coming off of jet lag. I just got back from Japan for vacation, so I'm 2 days in, and I decided it'd be a great idea to preach a sermon. So that's me. Thanks for coming along for the ride. We'll see how this goes. Wow. Okay, so Pastor Craig told me that you all are exploring what it looks like to build a healthy church. And that is something that at Safe Harbor, that's the church I come from, and if you hear the word SHOC, S-H-O-C, that's just the acronym for Safe Harbor. So I'll be saying SHOC a lot. It's a shock to the Orange County system. There's a lot of puns. It comes out, so. But anyways, so we have been exploring this at our church as well. We did a sermon series on what it looks like to build the beloved community. And in a lot of ways, that just means what does it look like to build a healthy community? We take the beloved community from Dr. King when he says, our goal is to create a beloved community. And this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives. Friends, one of the biggest lessons I have learned in planning a church. I'm 3 years in now. We're 3 years in. You all probably, if you've been around at Paradox, I know some of you, I got to hear some of your stories. You've been around for a while. You know what it's like to be in community in a church. And for a lot of us here, I would assume a lot of us here might even come out of churches that are very different from Paradox, that are very different from SHOC. And there might be a lot of difficult experiences that we've had in those churches. And so that's why Paradox, that's why SHOC exists, is so that we can ask the question, what does it look like to build a healthy church? What does it look like to build a healthy, beloved community? And what I've learned is that building a beloved community is not about building a perfect community. I had to learn that the hard way in the church planning process. I learned that building a perfect community is not sustainable. It's not the goal, and that's not even what Jesus teaches. And we'll get into that in a minute. But I learned that it's about creating a transformative community. And that transformative community, I have learned, has come from this idea of a community that is very, very focused on repair. Repaired community, repairing relationships, and that's what makes it transformative. But first, I want to address a very important boundary here. I want to name that this message is not for those who have been harmed. This message is for those who have harmed. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think a lot of us, if not all of us, can be both the harmed and the harmer. So this is probably a message for all of us. But I do want to name that the focus is on what we can do when we cause harm, not what we do as someone who has been harmed. So you are not required, those who have been harmed, to do these things. This is for those who have harmed. Cool? Okay. So with that, let's talk about relationships. So relationships are a dance between connection and rupture. I've learned this. In healthy relationships, they're a dance. There are times where you have deep connection. That's why you have a relationship, right? And then there are times where they rupture. And there's a dance between the two. And that doesn't mean that things are bad. That just means you're in relationship. That's the whole thing. So I am not used to using the clicker. Let's see where we are. Our goal in relationship is to learn about what to do when rupture happens. Yes, okay, good. So our goal in relationships is to learn what to do when rupture happens. That would be a very important goal. And like I said before, repair over perfection, right? So striving for perfection can actually prevent meaningful connection. Instead of perfection, Jesus calls us to prioritize humility and repair. Repair is an opportunity to strengthen relationships through honesty and responsibility. And I take this idea from Matthew 18, where he says, if your sibling sins against you, go and point out the fault just between the two of you. Now, I want to be careful to say I don't think this passage is about passing judgment. I think it's about restoring connection. And in order to restore connection, you have to name what connection was broken. You have to name what has been broken in that relationship. So the goal of repair is not simply to relieve our guilt or smooth things over. It's to rebuild genuine connection. And this requires humility, this requires openness, and a desire to understand the other person's experience, which is so hard. It's so hard. So let's get into it. Let's start with what is rupture. Well, rupture is, I'm having such a hard time with these slides. Okay, a rupture, yes, is a breaking connection, often a misunderstanding, an unkind word, or an unmet expectation. And in healthy relationships, connection and rupture are natural rhythms. Our goal is not to eliminate all rupture, but to be willing to repair when it happens. And there are barriers. There are barriers to us naming and reflecting on that rupture and why it happened. So here's some defense mechanisms that we may run into. And I want us for a minute, as we're looking at these defense mechanisms, to just pause and reflect on yourself and do some sort of compassionate, what I like to call compassionate curiosity. That's where you don't pass judgment, you just notice things, right? If you've ever done mindfulness practices, you might have been taught this, right? You just, oh, that's interesting, I do that, but not passing judgment. So the first one is shame and self-blame. So thinking, I'm a terrible person if we're doing this, and then that leads to you avoiding instead of repairing. The other one is self-righteousness or blaming of others. So it's easy to think they made me act this way, which prevents us from taking responsibility. Then you have denial or minimization. And that's where sometimes we downplay the hurt we've caused. And then we tell ourselves it wasn't that bad, which blocks true connection. And then honestly, for a lot of us, we just have a lack of really good models for repair. We haven't really experienced or seen it done well. And so it makes it very intimidating and unfamiliar. So I want us to just pause. You don't need to turn to someone and talk about it, but just think about it to yourself. Which one of these shows up in my relationships? I'll be honest, most of them show up in my relationship. These are things that a lot of us maybe experience, not just one over the other. But maybe there is something here that is not on the slide. There it is. Okay. I'm like, oh, did I not put it up? These are really cool slides, I will admit. I'm just not used to them. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Okay, so the reason that we did that little inventory is that by recognizing these patterns, that is the first step to repair. Naming what's happening, naming what you're doing. And we want to choose compassionate curiosity, right? Instead of letting these actions or these defense mechanisms dictate our actions. So, for those of you who are parents, for those of you who are on the internet, you may have heard of Dr. Becky. Has anyone here parents? Yes, yeah. I love Dr. Becky. I have a 11-month-old baby. Yes, I gave birth earlier this year, which is really fun. Yeah, woo! And I have been obsessed with Dr. Becky. She is a psychologist, and she gives parenting advice, and she does a really good job at it. And one of the things she talks about is repair, and it's repair with your kids. And I think she's really good at talking about repair as it relates to relationships in general. So I'm going to take some of her wisdom and share it with you. I think it's revolutionary. So she says that the first step to repair is to reflect on the rupture. So naming what happened, honestly acknowledging the behavior or action that led to the rupture without deflecting or assigning blame. I really like that. So as a practice for self-reflection, you can do this, you cannot. You have the agency to choose. You can go ahead and put your hand on your heart and breathe deeply and remind yourself that you are a good person capable of growth. A good person capable of growth. At Shock, we believe that instead of holding intrinsic badness, we hold intrinsic worthiness. A lot of us could name that as intrinsic goodness because we are made in the imago Dei, as our worship leader said today, the image of God, which is very, very good. And this, my friends, I think is the key. The key to repair is that self-compassion. I don't think we can honestly and truly repair until we repair with ourselves and know that we are good inside. I know there are a lot of people who may disagree with me, and that's okay. Like the wonderful announcer said at the beginning, you do not need to agree with this sermon, and I love that. But I just have found that so important in my process with relationships. The next step, part 2. There's part 1, there's part 2, is take responsibility and learn. Take ownership without expectation of any in return. And that's hard, but the goal here is not on getting external validation. The goal is not that. The goal here is taking responsibility by acknowledging the impact. And that's really hard, especially if you grew up in a very performative church culture where you just want external validation all the time. You got to accept that you may not get it. You can't control what the other person decides to respond, how the person decides to respond. All you can control is how you respond, right? If you're in therapy, you know that. We all laugh. The goal is taking responsibility by acknowledging the impact. I think that's so important in justice work, so important in healing work and trauma work. That's so important. And again, this comes back to activating compassionate curiosity. Remember that word again, compassionate curiosity. So rather than self-blame or becoming defensive, ask yourself, what contributed to your reaction or actions? And reflecting on this can help prevent similar ruptures in the future. So I know I said at the beginning, perfection is not the goal. That doesn't mean you just get to willy-nilly it and, rupture all the time. We do, through the repair process, learn how to not rupture as much. That is important. And then this is the last step, commit to change and growth. So state what you would do differently next time. Express an intention to handle things differently in the future. Then this commitment to change shows respect for the other person and helps strengthen trust. So the goal here in step 3 is to focus on reconnection, if the other person is willing. Remember that the main purpose of repair is not to feel better, but to restore genuine connection. And each act of repair is an act of love and commitment. Each act of repair is an act of love and commitment. I want to share the benefits or the impact of repair and why this is so important for us in community, when we're doing healthy community, when we're doing healthy relationships. We have the capital T trauma word, right? We use that word, we hear that word a lot, trauma. And a lot of times we think that trauma means the event itself, when it actually is, trauma comes out of the story we tell about the event. So the story we tell about the event can change depending on how people and how we process that event. And so if you are repairing, if you are apologizing, if you are doing a genuine apology, if you are doing genuine repair with someone, that changes that person's experience of that event. I'll give an example. I remember how many of you, okay, no, not that example. We'll do that one. Okay. So I was in campus ministry. I actually had a really positive experience, and this was college ministry, mainly because this was more egalitarian, and so women could lead, which was a big deal for me because I grew up very conservative. But there was one really big thing that left capital T trauma in my life, and that was their emphasis on this thing called purity culture. Has anyone heard of purity culture? Okay, yeah, we got some boos in the audience. Very good, I respect that, yes. And that was really traumatic for me. I had a mentor who, was really emphasizing this idea of saving, it sounds terrible now, I hate saying it, but saving yourself for marriage. And that was very, very damaging for me, especially as a closeted bisexual, because it wasn't just save yourself for marriage, it was also save yourself for straight marriage, which is very complicated for those who are queer. So there was an added layer of complication there. Anyways, this mentor of mine ended up leaving this campus ministry and had their own capital T trauma with their experience and became a very different person in a good way after her experience. And I think it was 6 years ago, I felt a push to address the harm that was caused. I felt a push to talk about and ask for an apology. You don't have to do this, those who have been harmed. Don't ever do this if you don't feel safe. I felt safe. I felt safe enough to address this. And I said, hey, so-and-so, you were great, but this right here was not so great. And I had a really, really hard time, and it really impacted me negatively. And you know what she did? She apologized, which was wild. How many of you, no, I'm not going to have you raise your hand. Has anyone gotten an apology from a church leader before? No. It's really powerful. He raised his hand, thank you. It's really powerful to get an apology from a church leader or from a Christian leader or a spiritual leader. It really does a lot. And I'm not going to say that my trauma is all gone and I don't have any purity culture trauma. I do. But I now have this different story about my experience because of the person being willing to enter into repair and connection with me. I do want to say, though, for those who have been harmed by a lot of people in the church, I also have those really negative experiences of not receiving that apology. And I want to name that too. That's really hard, and I'm really sorry. But I did want to share how this can be a really powerful experience in changing the narrative when we do choose to apologize. When we commit to repair, we create a community that values honesty, humility, and resilience. And I believe this is foundational to becoming a beloved community that reflects Christ's love and compassion. So we're going to do a very, very non-talking, you don't have to talk to anyone, I promise. My church, we do a lot of talking. We do a lot of discussions. I sense you might too. I don't know. I just got the vibes came off that way. We're not going to do that. This is still for you and you alone. And you are welcome to participate or not participate or participate in your mind. But all we're going to do is we're going to take our hands, and you're welcome to raise them. You're welcome to keep them in your lap. Just keep them separated. And we're going to try this little exercise, and you can do this little silly activity in your future ruptures, in your relationships, in the repair process that you're experiencing. But what you're going to do on this side with this hand is you're going to assign it as this. I am a good person who. That's it. I am a good person who. And then on the other hand, you're going to assign that rupture. So I am a good person who yelled at my spouse yesterday. I am a good person who yelled at my kid because we were late to church and they weren't putting their shoes on, and it's really frustrating. I am a good person who negatively imposed purity culture on students. Whoa. I am a good person who blank. And the reason we want to have that distinction is we want to separate our identity from our actions. We want to separate our identity from our actions because, like I said before, and like our worship leader said before, we are created in the image of God. And if we don't start there, if we don't start with that intrinsic worthiness, or as I like to say, our intrinsic goodness, then this isn't going to work, my friends. It's just not. We're not going to have true repair. We're not going to see the imago Dei in others. We're not going to even see the imago Dei in ourselves. So, the challenge for us this week, and I think there might be some discussion questions at the end, but the challenge, I'll leave this, is to think about a relationship. It doesn't need to be your most tumultuous one. It could be as simple as your kid, who you tried with the tying of the shoes in the morning, and they were late, and you were late, and you yelled at them. It could be as simple as after church, going to lunch, or going home, and starting that repair process with your kid and saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have yelled. This is what was going on for me. I think this is what was going on for you. Let's try it differently next time. You can just start there. You don't have to do like the, most tumultuous relationship you have. But you can. You can get there, but we can start small, right? Start small and check off those little boxes. Friends, repair may be very difficult. It is very difficult, especially if it wasn't modeled to us, and especially if it wasn't modeled to us in the church well. But it is a transformative act of love and humility. And this week, let's each take one step towards repair in our relationships, trusting that the Spirit will guide us. So I want to end with this vision of community. Imagine a community marked not by perfection, but by a willingness to repair and reconnect. This reflects the heart of Christ and serves as a powerful witness to one another and to our wider community. Let's pray. Lord, give us the courage to repair. Help us to choose connection over perfection, humility over shame, and love over defensiveness. May we be a community that reflects your grace in our close relationships and build the beloved community together. Amen. Thank you, friends, for having me.